Perhaps more people come to Southwell to go to the races, but I came to see the Minster and ended up in the Workhouse. Around 1601, in late Elizabethan days, Parliament passed a Poor Law Act which replaced the old voluntary style of assistance and introduced a poor rate tax on all property holders to be used for the relief of the poor. There would be relief, money, food, etc., to people remaining in their own homes, called out relief, but increasingly, and of course to save taxpayers' money, people were moved into designated accommodation where indoor relief would be provided in return for unpaid work. Then, in 1834, what is often referred to as the New Poor Law was passed. This enabled parishes to group together, have larger designated premises, which became known as union workhouses, and thus benefit from economies of scale. This workhouse at Southwell was actually opened before the 1834 Act in 1824 on local initiative. In fact, it served as an example, almost a prototype, for the way things were set up in the 1834 Act. Upon entering the workhouse, husbands and wives were separated and lived in dormitories in different parts of the building. Similarly, different categories of paupers, the old and infirm, the able-bodied, and children, were also segregated. And all this is within living memory. Our father often used to say to us, "Do you want us to end up in the workhouse?" if we ever asked for an extra slice of bread. Anyway, we did manage to get out of the workhouse, and we're now back in town amongst the better class of people who used to pay those rates. Whilst lodging in the Saracen's Head here, Charles I in 1646 surrendered to the Scots Commissioners. Byron, whose eventual home, Newstead Abbey, is nearby, spent time here between 1804 and 1807. Viscount Allenby was born nearby at Brockenhurst Hall in 1871. So let's now look at the Minster. It is believed that a church was founded here around 630 AD by Paulinus, the first Bishop of York. The two western towers, usually described as pepper pot towers, are rare in England, and some people think they would look more at home in France. These towers, together with the low central tower and the nave and transepts, are all Norman, early 12th century. This little porch on the north side here is a rare late Norman construction. The choir is early English Gothic around 1250, and the chapter house decorated Gothic around 1300. We'll see the chapter house shortly. And here's that Norman central tower which we mentioned earlier. The present church belonged to a college of secular canons, loosely under the wing of Archbishops of York, and this arrangement subsisted until 1841. In 1884, the new diocese of Southwell was created. This covered the counties of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. Previously, this area was part of Lichfield diocese. But look, we're now going towards that chapter house that we mentioned earlier. Decorated Gothic around 1300. Just look at these leaves carved out of stone here. Indeed, leaf carving is the chief glory of this cathedral. The leaves of Southwell are world-renowned. Just note that this chapter house has no central column to hold up the roof. This is where the dean and his chapter of canons would hold their meetings. We'll look at some of that carving above each seat. And then we'll have a look at some of the individual leaves that are carved on the columns and see how many you can identify. To give you a start, I understand that they include the oak, the maple, the hop, the vine, the ivy, white bryony, hawthorn, whitethorn, wild apple, wild rose, potentilla and buttercup. And I'm not going to tell you which is which, mainly because I don't know. So now back into the church and a look at those massive Norman columns. And outside the church again we can see the remains of the 15th century palace of the Archbishops of York and the 20th century Bishop's Manor. In 1926 the Diocese of Derby was created, leaving Southwell as the Cathedral for Nottinghamshire. Incidentally, Minster is an old word for monastery and came to be associated with large churches, particularly, strangely enough, York, which was the father church of this Minster, and the only other one I can think of is Beverley, also in York.